He bought a house by the lake for only $700. He wanted to start a new life, far away from his past. But inside, he found the belongings of a man he had long believed to be dead. And he realized that the truth had been waiting for him here all along. Subscribe and write in the comments which city you are watching from. The road had long since turned from asphalt to gravel, then from gravel to dirt, until even the faintest signs of civilization were swallowed by the forest. Michael drove in silence, the hum of the engine the only companion to his wandering thoughts. His hands, calloused and trembling slightly from years of habit, gripped the steering wheel loosely. He had been driving for hours, maybe days. It no longer mattered. Every mile he put behind him was another step away from the man he used to be. When he finally saw the water shimmering through the thinning trees, it felt almost unreal. A lake, or perhaps an old reservoir, lay still beneath a cliff of gray stone, the surface reflecting the overcast sky like tarnished glass. He slowed, letting the truck idle as he scanned the shoreline. There it was. A narrow wooden bridge stretched from the gravel bank to a weathered house built directly into the rock. Its walls were the same color as the cliff behind it, as though the structure had grown from the mountain itself. Michael parked near the edge, cut the engine, and sat for a long while. His reflection in the windshield looked older than he remembered. The lines around his eyes, the gray at his temples, the faint scar above his brow. It wasn't the face of an FBI agent anymore. It was the face of someone who had lost the right to be called one. He had left the bureau 6 years ago, carrying nothing but a cardboard box of personal items and a silence he could never explain. They had called it burnout, an acceptable word for the unspeakable truth. His partner had died, and he had survived. The municipal office in the nearby town had barely asked questions when he bought the property. The woman at the desk had said the house had been seized years ago and put up for auction after the previous owner's death. Her tone had been perfunctory, detached, like she was reading from a list. $700 later, Michael had walked out with a key and a deed. The paper folded into his jacket pocket like a secret he wasn't sure he wanted to keep. Now, standing at the start of the bridge, he felt the uneasy quiet of the place pressing in on him. The planks creaked under his boots as he crossed, the water beneath black and still. The air smelled of pine and damp wood, of rain and something faintly metallic. He reached the door, rusted key in hand, and hesitated. For a second, he thought he heard something inside, a soft scrape, maybe, or the shifting of weight. But when he turned the key and pushed the door open, there was only the stale echo of his own intrusion. The interior was dim and cool. Dust floated in the light that seeped through thin curtains. The furniture was sparse: a table, 2 chairs, a bookshelf, bowed under the weight of old case files and weathered books. A coat hung on a rack near the door, still shaped as though someone had taken it off moments ago. Michael stepped inside, his eyes moving slowly over the space. It didn't feel abandoned. It felt paused, like a life interrupted mid-sentence. He moved through the living room and into what might have once been an office. On the desk lay a stack of papers, yellowed at the edges, covered in handwriting so familiar it stopped him cold. He picked up the top page and read the first line. "If you're reading this, I didn't make it." The signature below the text was a single initial, J. His breath caught. Jonathan. Michael sat heavily in the chair, the wood groaning beneath him. It had been years since he'd said the name aloud. Jonathan Doyle had been more than his partner. He had been his compass, the only one who still believed in doing things the right way when the Bureau had begun to blur the lines. Jonathan had died on an operation that was never supposed to happen, an off-the-book surveillance job that had ended with an explosion, a report rewritten, and a funeral without answers. The official story had never made sense, but Michael had signed it anyway, his silence the price of staying alive. Now, here, in this forgotten house, that silence echoed louder than ever. He looked around the room again, noticing details he'd missed before. A coat with a familiar patch on the sleeve, a mug with a chipped handle, a faint indentation on the cushion of the chair across from him, as if someone had only just stood up. He rose and wandered toward a narrow hallway. The bedroom door stood half open. Inside, the bed was neatly made, though the sheets were faded and thin. On the nightstand, a watch rested beside a silver flask. He picked up the watch and turned it over. The engraving on the back read, "To J.D., you'll need it more than I will. M.C." It was his own handwriting, his own gift. He sat down heavily on the edge of the bed, the floorboards creaking beneath his weight. The air seemed thicker here, heavy with the scent of old wood and something faintly electrical. He glanced toward the corner of the room, where an outlet flickered softly with a faint light. There was power here, even though no one was supposed to have lived here for years. A cable ran along the baseboard toward the floorboards beneath the bed. Kneeling, he lifted the wooden panel, and there it was. A small metal box covered in dust. Inside, a single flash drive, wrapped in black tape, marked with red ink. Case 47R. His pulse quickened. That number. He knew it. It was the designation of the operation they had been working on before everything fell apart. The case that had led to Jonathan's death. The one he was ordered to forget. He set the flash drive on the bed and stared at it. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows. Somewhere across the lake, a faint light flickered, steady and deliberate, as if someone were signaling from the opposite shore. Michael moved to the window and squinted into the darkness. He couldn't make out shapes, only movement, something, or someone, standing among the trees. The hair on the back of his neck rose. He turned off the lamp, letting the room sink into shadow. He sat for hours, listening, the sound of water lapping against the rocks below, the sigh of wind through the trees, the distant cry of a nightbird. He should have felt afraid, but instead there was something else. A strange calm, the kind he hadn't felt since before that night 6 years ago. It was as if the house itself was breathing with him, its walls holding stories that waited to be heard. When he finally lay down on the bed, he kept the flash drive on the nightstand beside him. Sleep came in uneasy waves, filled with half-formed memories. The crackle of a radio, Jonathan's voice saying, "Trust no one inside the bureau," and the echo of his own words from long ago. "We'll finish this together." He woke before dawn to the faint hum of electricity and the taste of metal in the air. The sky outside was pale gray, the lake like glass. He sat up and stared out the window as light spread across the water. The house stood utterly still, its reflection merging with the cliff behind it. It was quiet. Too quiet. And for a moment he had the strange impression that the house itself was waiting for him, or for the truth he had come here to find. He looked at the flash drive again, the letters sharp against the black tape. Case 47R. He whispered it under his breath, as if saying it aloud might summon the past from its grave. Then he slid it into his pocket and exhaled slowly. The morning light broke over the water, turning the mist to silver. Michael stepped onto the porch, his boots heavy against the damp boards. Across the lake, the trees were silent, the faint light from the night gone as if it had never existed. He sat down in the old chair on the veranda, the wood creaking beneath him. The lake rippled once, disturbed by something unseen beneath the surface. He didn't move. Somewhere deep inside, he already knew. This was no accident. He hadn't found this place, it had found him. And the story buried here wasn't over. It was only beginning. The morning mist had not yet lifted from the lake when Michael awoke, still in the clothes he had worn the night before. The air inside the house was cool, and smelled faintly of ash and cedar. For a long while he sat on the edge of the bed, his hands folded loosely, staring at the faint imprint on the sheets beside him, as though expecting another body to be there. He had dreamt again, snatches of memory, flashes of Jonathan's voice, the crackle of a radio, the metallic scent of blood on his hands. He rubbed his temples, trying to dispel the lingering fog of sleep. The flash drive lay where he had left it, on the nightstand, like a relic that carried both truth and damnation. He made coffee on the small gas stove, the sputtering flame echoing too loudly in the silence. Outside, the world was still wrapped in the dull light of early morning. The water stretched out like a mirror, unbroken by wind or wave. The same bridge that had creaked under his weight yesterday now glistened with dew, as though the night had washed it clean. He stood by the window, sipping bitter coffee, his eyes drawn again to the opposite shore. There was nothing there now. No light, no movement, but the certainty of being watched clung to him like humidity. The laptop he carried from the truck was old, dented along the edges, but it still worked. He sat at the desk where he had found Jonathan's letter and inserted the flash drive into a USB port. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Then a single folder appeared on the screen. 47R. Inside it were dozens of encrypted files extensions he didn't recognize, names reduced to strings of letters and numbers. A few opened only as blank text, gibberish symbols scattered across the screen. But one folder wasn't locked. Its name was simple, handwritten in lowercase letters. Remember. He clicked it open. There were photos, grainy black and white surveillance images. Men in suits exchanging folders in a dimly lit garage. A face he recognized from television, a senator, now serving on the Intelligence Committee, speaking with a man whose features were partially obscured by shadow. Then came internal bureau documents, stamped classified, with red annotations in Jonathan's handwriting. Each page hinted at something enormous, off-the-books transfers, private contracts, disappearances disguised as routine assignments. Michael leaned back, his chest tightening. It was the same case that had consumed their final months together, the one that had spiraled out of control, that had ended with an explosion and an official statement blaming a faulty gas main. But Jonathan had clearly gone deeper. He had found proof. And if this flash drive had survived, then maybe Jonathan had known he would not. The light outside shifted as the sun began to climb above the trees, flooding the room with a pale glow. Dust floated through it like tiny ghosts. He saved the files to the laptop and disconnected the flash drive, slipping it back into his pocket. He had learned, painfully, that digital evidence alone could disappear as easily as a man's reputation. Restless, he began to explore the house again. The floorboards creaked under his steps, each sound magnified in the silence. In the narrow hallway, he noticed something he hadn't seen before. A small bulge behind the wallpaper. He peeled it back and found a concealed compartment built into the wall. Inside was a metal box, sealed with 2 rusted latches. He carried it to the desk, pried it open, and froze. Inside were notebooks, photographs, and a small recorder. The first notebook was water-damaged but still legible, filled with Jonathan's handwriting. The entries began like field notes, times, locations, code names. But halfway through, the tone changed. "They know I'm still digging," one entry read. "The calls are different now. No one uses names. Even Michael doesn't know how deep this goes. If he finds this place, tell him to finish it." Michael's throat tightened. He turned to the next page lists of names, initials, account numbers. And then the last line, underlined twice. "Trust no one in the bureau, not even those you think you saved." He picked up the recorder and pressed play. Static filled the air, followed by Jonathan's voice. Hoarse, hurried, trembling. "If you're hearing this, I'm still in the house. I can't leave yet. I think they traced the signal. I've hidden the files, but they'll come for me. Don't go to the bureau, Mike. They'll call you unstable again. Say you're seeing ghosts. They've buried this once. They'll bury it again." The sound of a door slamming followed, then footsteps, and finally a muffled cry before the recording cut off. For a long time, Michael sat motionless, the recorder still in his hand. His mind reeled backward through years he had tried to erase the investigation, the endless nights of surveillance, the growing paranoia that had turned colleagues into suspects. He remembered Jonathan pacing in their office, ranting about how deep the corruption ran. He had laughed then, told him to get some sleep. The next week, Jonathan was dead. He rose abruptly and walked outside. The lake air hit him like a slap, sharp and clean. He stood on the edge of the bridge, staring into the mirrored surface. Somewhere beneath that stillness, he could almost see their reflections from 6 years ago. 2 men, younger, unbroken, believing that justice was still a word that meant something. A noise behind him broke the spell, a rustle of leaves, quick and deliberate. He turned sharply. Nothing. Only the wind moving through the pines. But when he returned inside, the unease stayed with him. He spent the rest of the afternoon cataloging what he had found, photographing each notebook and file, backing them up on an encrypted drive. He knew enough to understand what possession of these documents meant. He was holding evidence of crimes committed by the very institution sworn to uphold the law. Evidence that could destroy reputations and lives. As evening descended, he drove into the nearby town for supplies. The grocery store was small, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone else. The cashier, an older man with a name tag that read Harlan, scanned his items slowly, squinting at him over the counter. "You're staying up by the lake?" he asked, his tone casual but probing. Michael nodded. "Just bought the old house by the cliff." Harlan's brows furrowed. "That place has been empty a long time. You sure you want to live there alone?" "Why?" The man hesitated, then shrugged. "Folks say it's bad luck. Last owner. Well, no one really knows what happened. Sheriff came out once or twice, then the government boys showed up. House went quiet after that." He handed Michael his change. "You ask me. Some things are better left alone." The words stayed with him on the drive back. The road wound through the dark, headlights cutting thin lines through the trees. When he reached the bridge, fog had rolled over the lake again, thick enough to swallow the reflection of the moon. As he stepped out of the truck, he thought he saw movement near the tree line. A brief flicker of light, then nothing. Inside, the house felt colder than before. He locked the door, double-checking the latch, and set the groceries down on the counter. A faint noise came from the living room, a scrape, like a chair being shifted. He froze. "Hello?" he called out, his voice steady but quiet. No answer. He reached for the flashlight and moved toward the sound. The beam cut across the floor, revealing the overturned chair near the window. The curtain swayed slightly, though the window was closed. He picked it up and set it right again, his pulse drumming in his ears. He noticed then that the small red light on one of the cameras mounted in the corner was blinking. He hadn't noticed it before. He traced the cable down to a hidden power strip, connected to a network switch. Jonathan had wired the house with surveillance equipment. But why was it still on? He powered the system up fully, the monitors flickering to life. One by one, grainy images appeared. The front porch, the bridge, the hallway, even the small clearing behind the house. Most showed only darkness and mist. Then one camera angled toward the road, flickered briefly. A car's headlights flashed across the lens before disappearing. Michael stared at the screen, waiting for it to return, but it didn't. He rewound the footage, pausing at the frame with the headlights. A license plate glinted just enough to read the last digits, C-57. It meant nothing, but the dread that crawled through him said otherwise. He switched off the monitors and leaned against the wall, breathing deeply. Every instinct that had once kept him alive on operations told him this was no coincidence. Someone knew where he was. Someone had been waiting for him to find this place. Sleep was impossible. He sat by the desk, notebook open, and began to write everything he had found. Every name, every date. If he was right, the rot inside the Bureau had reached the highest levels, the kind of truth that got men like Jonathan killed. By dawn, his eyes burned from exhaustion. Outside, fog drifted lazily across the water again, the same unbroken surface as the day before. He stepped out onto the porch, inhaling the chill air. The mountains loomed silent, unmoving. Yet the stillness no longer felt peaceful. It felt expectant, as if the world itself were holding its breath. He knew what he had to do. There was no going back to the Bureau, no filing of formal reports. He had seen how they buried the truth. He would have to finish this the way Jonathan had started it, alone. But before he did, he needed to understand just how much of his friend's shadow still lingered here. He went back inside, opened the recorder one last time, and replayed the final seconds. There, barely audible beneath the static, he heard a whisper. 2 words that hadn't registered before. They're inside. The meaning hit him like a blow. Not outside. Not enemies in the shadows. Inside the Bureau. The people they had trusted. He stood there for a long time, the morning light spilling across the floor, illuminating the dust motes that danced in the air. The house was silent again, but it no longer felt empty. It was alive with the weight of secrets, with the memory of a man who had tried to warn him. Michael closed the recorder, pocketed the flash drive, and looked around one last time. He would not run this time. He had done that once before, and a good man had died because of it. Now it was his turn to step back into the fire. As he left the house and crossed the bridge, the reflection of the rising sun spread over the water, turning it blood red for an instant. It looked, for all the world, like an omen. The dawn came gray and heavy, settling over the lake like a veil. Mist hung low, wrapping itself around the bridge, and curling against the cliffside, where the house clung stubbornly to stone. Michael hadn't slept. He had spent the night hunched over Jonathan's notes, piecing together fragments of names, numbers, and places until the words blurred into one another. The deeper he read, the clearer it became that his friend had stumbled upon something enormous, something so dangerous that the Bureau had chosen to erase him rather than confront it. The file spoke of covert accounts, untraceable fund transfers, and internal clearances for operations that officially didn't exist. Every page was a weight pressing on his chest. He sat by the window, his eyes gritty from exhaustion, watching as the fog began to burn away under the pale light of morning. Somewhere in the distance, a crow cawed, its voice sharp against the silence. The sound seemed to echo through the house, bouncing off walls that had held too many secrets. Michael's reflection in the glass looked hollow, drawn thin by days of isolation and sleepless nights. He knew what he had to do. He had known it since the moment he heard Jonathan's voice on that recorder, whispering, "They're inside." The laptop blinked softly on the desk. He had spent hours the night before backing up everything, the notes, the recordings, the images, the lists of names. A single message draft waited open on the screen, addressed to a journalist he trusted. They had worked together years ago on a case that nearly cost them both their careers. She had courage, and more importantly, she had no allegiance to anyone inside the Bureau. He read the message again, fingers hovering above the keyboard. "If you receive this," it said, "then you'll know the truth about Jonathan Doyle and about the people who killed him. Publish everything. Don't wait." He hesitated before pressing send. Once the information was out, there would be no turning back. The people who had silenced Jonathan would come for him next, and there would be no one left to protect him. But perhaps that was how it was always meant to end. He clicked send. The message vanished from the screen, replaced by a simple confirmation. Sent. Outside, the air thickened again, a sign that rain was on its way. He could feel it coming, that faint metallic tension before a storm. He packed the remaining files into a small waterproof bag, along with the flash drive and recorder. His mind was clear, sharper than it had been in years. He checked his pistol, one of the few remnants of his time in the bureau, and loaded a single spare magazine. The weapon felt strange in his hands, heavy with memory. By late afternoon, the sky had darkened to the color of bruised steel. Wind pushed through the trees, rattling branches and carrying the scent of rain. He stepped outside to secure the loose shutters, and that was when he saw it. A black SUV parked on the road beyond the trees. Its windows were tinted, the engine still running. The same feeling that had crawled beneath his skin for days surged again. But this time, it was no longer suspicion. It was certainty. They were here. Michael went back inside and turned off the lights. The interior of the house dissolved into shadow. He moved quietly, pulling the curtains shut, listening. A distant car door closed, then another. Gravel crunched under boots. The sound of quiet, measured voices drifted across the bridge. 2, maybe 3 men. He could picture them already. Government-issued jackets, earpieces, the kind of calm efficiency that came with sanctioned violence. He crouched by the window, heart pounding. Through the narrow slit in the curtain, he saw a faint beam of light sweep across the bridge. They were approaching. He moved toward the back of the room, grabbed the recorder, and switched it on. "This is Michael Clayton," he whispered, voice low but steady. "If anyone finds this, the files are out. I've sent everything. They can kill me, but they can't kill the truth." He set the recorder down beside the laptop and turned to face the door. The first knock came soft, deliberate. "Mr. Clayton," a voice called, calm, professional. "We're here to discuss some matters related to your recent communications. Open the door, please." He said nothing. The voice came again, harder this time. "You don't want this to get messy. We just need to talk." Michael backed away slowly, positioning himself near the corner where the hallway met the main room. Another knock, then the sound of metal striking wood. They were forcing it. The old hinges groaned. His breathing steadied. When the door burst open, the first man stepped inside cautiously, flashlight sweeping through the dark. Michael waited until he saw the second silhouette cross the threshold before he moved. The struggle was quick and brutal. The room exploded with noise, the thud of bodies, a muffled shout, the crash of glass. Michael's shoulder slammed against the wall as he fired once, the sound deafening in the enclosed space. The nearest figure dropped, the flashlight spinning across the floor, its beam slicing through the smoke. The other man lunged, and Michael grabbed him by the arm, twisting until the gun fell from his grasp. They crashed into the table, scattering papers and splintering wood. The man went down hard, and Michael stood over him, chest heaving. From outside came the roar of the wind and the crack of thunder. The third man, there had to be a third, was still out there. Michael snatched the ID badge from the fallen agent's jacket. The name read, Department of Homeland Security. It confirmed what he already suspected. This was sanctioned. They weren't rogue operatives. They were cleanup. He stumbled toward the desk, blood slick on his sleeve. The laptop screen was shattered from the struggle, its glow reduced to a dying flicker. He picked up the recorder again, his fingers trembling. "They sent them," he said into it. "Homeland. They know." Jonathan was right. They were never after the enemy outside. The enemy was always us. A noise at the window made him turn. A shadow moved past the glass, then another. He could see their shapes against the dim lightning, the glint of metal in their hands. There was no time. He grabbed the waterproof bag, stuffed the recorder inside, and bolted for the back door. The wind tore at his clothes as he stumbled down the narrow path toward the lake. Rain had begun to fall, cold needles against his skin. Behind him, the house glowed faintly with the light of flashlights sweeping through its rooms. He reached the edge of the dock and stopped, chest heaving. The water stretched out dark and endless, rippling under the storm. There was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. But there was one thing left to do. He pulled the bag's strap tighter around his shoulder and looked back at the house. Through the sheets of rain, it looked like something alive, pulsing with light and shadow, its walls breathing in rhythm with the storm. For a moment, he thought he saw Jonathan standing on the porch, watching him with that same quiet determination he remembered from years ago. Then the image was gone. He turned back to the water and stepped onto the small rowboat tethered to the dock. Lightning split the sky, and in its flash, he saw the reflection of the cliff towering behind him. He pushed off from the shore, the boat rocking violently in the wind. As he rowed toward the center of the lake, gunshots cracked from the house, their echoes swallowed by thunder. He kept rowing until the house was only a dim outline against the cliff, until the rain blurred everything into one vast gray curtain. When he reached the middle, he stopped and pulled out the recorder. "If this is where it ends," he said quietly, "then let the house remember what we tried to do." He dropped it into the waterproof bag, sealed it, and tied it to the underside of the boat. Then he took out the gun, checked the single bullet left in the chamber, and waited. The storm raged around him, waves slapping against the sides of the boat. The lights from the shore grew closer again, 2 flashlights weaving across the bridge. They had found his trail. He closed his eyes and thought of Jonathan, the way he used to laugh after long nights in the field, the way he used to say, "We don't serve the Bureau, Mike. We serve the truth." For the first time in years, Michael smiled. The gunfire came again, tearing through the roar of rain. He felt the sting of a bullet graze his shoulder, then another hitting the boat's edge. He dropped to one knee, gripping the oar, and with a surge of strength, shoved the boat toward the deeper water. A final flash of lightning illuminated the house, its roof, its windows, its reflection trembling on the surface of the lake, and then, in the next instant, the explosion. The sound was like the sky itself tearing apart. Fire burst from the house, a brief bloom of orange and white that vanished almost instantly beneath the rain. The cliff shuddered. Debris rained down into the water. The house, the files, the walls that had held Jonathan's secrets, was gone. Michael floated there, the shockwave rocking the boat. Smoke drifted across the lake, mingling with steam from the rain hitting fire. He knew they would think he was dead. Maybe that was for the best. He rowed slowly toward the opposite shore, the muscles in his arms burning, blood seeping from his wound. The rain began to ease, the storm moving eastward, leaving behind only the hiss of cooling embers. When his feet finally touched the muddy bank, dawn was breaking again. He looked back once more. The house was nothing but a smoldering ruin on the cliff, its reflection rippling faintly on the water's surface. And yet, as the light spread, it almost seemed to glow from within, like the last breath of something that refused to die. Weeks later, the world learned the truth. The journalist published the files in full names, dates, recordings. The scandal swept through Washington like wildfire. High-ranking officials resigned, others vanished. The Bureau called it an internal breach, but everyone knew it was more than that. On the edge of the lake, the ruins of the house remained untouched. Locals said that at night, When the fog rolled in, a single light could still be seen, flickering from where the porch used to be, and sometimes a man's voice whispered faintly across the water. No one ever found Michael Clayton's body. Some believed he drowned. Others said he disappeared into the mountains, carrying the last of Jonathan's legacy with him. But the lake still remembered. The cliff still stood. And the house, though gone, continued to speak in its own way, through the silence it left behind. The story was over, but the truth it carried would never rest. The house had told it all. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe for more. Watch the next one, and share this video with someone who still believes that every truth finds its voice.